Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey. I am the community manager on the scholarships team, and we are in our second week of Career Month. So thanks for joining us. Last week's theme was finding your dream job, and this week we're going over resources on how to apply for that dream job. So we're here with Kathleen.
Hi, everyone.
Who is also a community manager on the scholarships team. We work together, and Kathleen will be reviewing a few resumes today in her webinar. She has chosen 3 resumes that you pre-submitted, and we'll be going over what you did great and what could use some work. And hopefully in going over those resumes, you'll get a few tips on how to work on yours. So I'll hand it over to Kathleen so she can introduce herself.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Like Kelsey said, my name is Kathleen, and I am also a community manager here on the scholarships team. I'm going to be talking to you today about how to add your Udacity experience to your resume and just how to craft your resume overall. Some of the things that I talk about today will be a little bit similar to a webinar I did a couple months ago called Crafting a Killer Resume. So if you have any questions after watching today's resume and you want a little bit more detail, I recommend watching the recording of that, and we'll make sure that you have a link to that webinar, because I'll just go into a little bit more detail about some of the things that I'm going to go over kind of quickly today, because I really want to leave a lot of time to live edit some resumes so you can see what that process looks like and also answer your questions at the end. And just for those of you who don't know me or aren't familiar with my background, the reason that I'm here talking to you today is because in my previous role, I was a career coach, and I worked for a workforce development nonprofit where I have edited probably close to 500 resumes for people who are entering the tech field. I've talked to a ton of recruiters and hiring managers. I've talked to candidates who got feedback on their resumes. So I have a pretty, I wouldn't call myself an expert on anything, but I have had a good amount of exposure to resumes in the tech field, especially for folks who are entering the tech field or pivoting their careers in the tech field. So I hope to share some of that with you today. And I am going to go ahead and share a presentation with you. All right. Great. So today is all about building your resume, how you can showcase your experience and stand out from other candidates. So overview of the agenda, we're going to go over the components of a resume, how you can stand out, how you can write a tech resume when you've never worked in tech. That includes how you can add your Udacity experience to your resume, some high-level do's and don'ts. I'm going to share some links to resources and upcoming events, and then we're going to do a live resume editing session and some Q&A after that. Diving right in, your resume should have the purpose of your resume, and I think it's good to go over this because most people know what a resume is. They know that they need it to apply for a job, but I think it's just important to go over this because it's really easy to kind of get lost in the nuances of writing a resume, the do's and don'ts, and different pieces of advice. So at the end of the day, your resume's goal is to convince the reader that you're a qualified candidate for a specific job opportunity and that they should choose you to interview instead of somebody else. It is not a comprehensive summary of every job you've ever had, and it should never sound like a job description for a previous role. Each resume should be tailored to the job that you're applying for. And so for the most part, you should never submit the same exact resume twice. Sometimes you'll just need to make minor tweaks, but your resume should really be tailored to that specific job opportunity. There are 3 main components of your resume, and these should be your top 3 priorities when writing your resume. The first are power statements, second is skills, and the third is formatting. A power statement are also known as your bullets, but they're not just a description of the responsibilities at your job. Your power statement should really show the value that you brought to your previous roles, and they should highlight the accomplishments that you had to prove your value to a company. Your skills section should, for technical resumes, generally have their own section, generally towards the top of your resume, where it just kind of very briefly overviews and highlights the core skills that you have. But they should also show up in your power statements as qualifiers, where you can talk more about how you use those skills, so that the reader can get an idea of what proficiency level you're at with those skills. And then finally, formatting, which might not seem as important as the others, but really, I cannot overstate how important formatting is. It just shows an attention to detail and that you care about the job that you're applying for. And so formatting is really important for kind of a less obvious reason, because it just shows your dedication and your focus on that one job opportunity. So some key rules in tech: resumes should never be more than a page. Simpler is better. I think a lot of people want to come up with cool creative formats or colors or pictures to try to make their resume stand out. But a lot of times this can just make resumes look too busy. So unless you're applying for a job in design or you have specific training in the design field, I always say that simpler is better. Keep it clean, keep the font legible, make sure that people can read it. And that will help your resume stand out just in and of itself. So talking more about power statements, because I think these can be kind of tricky to nail down, but once you have a good system and habit for writing them, it becomes, I think, a lot easier to just churn these out really quickly. The main ingredient of your power statements are action verbs, quantifiers, qualifiers, and results. Your action verbs should always start your power statement. Every power statement should start with an action verb. And you want to try to think of exciting, punchy verbs to start your power statements. So you'll notice that in these examples, all of these are really strong verbs that say exactly what you did. Quantifiers and qualifiers are similar. They describe what you did. Quantifiers, as the name would indicate, are numbers. So it's frequency, amount, dollars, percentages, things like that, that show that adds a number value to the work that you did. Qualifiers are pretty much everything else, non-number details. So these can be things like processes, software, tools, titles, etc. And these describe how you did your job in a non-quantified way. And then finally, every power statement should end with a result. And this talks about what outcomes you achieved, what was the value that you added. And sometimes you might see that you have quantifiers in your result. That's totally okay. Or you might have qualifiers in your result or action verbs in your result. That is okay. As long as these 4 items are showing up in your power statement, then that's a good thing. They can be mixed and matched and combined, but you always want to have an action verb at the beginning. You always want to end with a result, and then things can kind of be mixed up in the middle depending on what makes sense for what you're writing. So to go over this in a really simple way, formula that I recommend starting with and then editing from there: start with your action verb, add in your qualifiers and quantifiers, add in your results, and you have a winning power statement. Again, these things can be mixed up a little bit, but you always want these 4 things in your power statements. So that all sounds great, but how can you stand out from a group of equally qualified candidates? And I'm going to kick this off by asking a question of all of you, and that is, how long do you think the average recruiter spends reviewing a resume? If you know the answer, don't type it. If you haven't heard this question before, take a stab at it. I'm looking at the chat right now, and I'd love to see some of your ideas. All right, so we see 6 seconds. What else do you all think? 1 to 2 minutes, 15 seconds, 15 seconds, 6 seconds, 20 seconds. All right, this is lower than I usually see. So the correct answer, Aditya got it right off the bat, is 6 seconds. That is not a lot of time. So your resume needs to grab somebody's attention, and they need to do it really, really quickly. So if you're reading this and you haven't heard this before, don't panic. There are ways to do this. And the best way to do this, I think, are 3 main things. Have your most relevant experience at the top, have eye-catching language, and make sure your resume looks good. I always say that relevance is more important than chronology. If you did a job 5 years ago, but you did something in that job that's really relevant to a job you're applying for now, that should go above your most recent experience. It doesn't have to be in order. You'll have the dates on there. The employer will figure it out. And this includes work that you didn't get paid for by a company. This can be things that you did freelance or as a volunteer. Any work experience counts. Um, Eye-catching language is I think when you're starting with your verbs, back to the action verbs, you want to pick words that are punchy and exciting. You want to avoid more passive verbs like helped, assisted, and supported, or verbs that are in the progressive tense. And in English, these are verbs that end with ing, so helping, assisting, supporting. And depending on what language your resume is in, the grammar might vary a little bit. But in general, you want to pick present or past tense verbs that really stand out and are strong. And something that I always think is good to do is to mirror the language in the job that you're applying for. So what I do is I print out the job description and I take a highlighter and I highlight any of the key skills I see in the job description. I also look for words that are used multiple times. So if I'm reading a job description that in 3 different requirements of the job have the word analyze in them, I'm going to know that analyzing is a really important skill for that job I'm applying for. And I'm going to make sure that one of my very first power statements on my resume starts with the word analyze. So things like that can subconsciously grab people's attention without them even realizing what you're trying to do with that. And then finally, your resume should look good. There's never an excuse for any spelling errors or formatting errors on your resume. Have multiple people proofread your resume. I have a couple friends and we all take turns proofreading our each other's resumes whenever we're applying to jobs or just keeping our application materials updated. So my resume never goes out without at least two other people looking at it first. I recommend you do the same thing. And keeping your format clean is more important than having a really cool or eye-catching format. Don't worry about colors. Don't worry about getting creative. Just keep it really clean and neat. And then finally, your tech resumes should always be 1 page. This might be new to folks who are transitioning from academia or the healthcare field or other fields where it's normal to have a CV that is multiple pages long. But in tech, someone's only spending 6 seconds looking at your resume. If you have a second page, they're not even going to know that it's there. So keep everything to 1 page and make sure that every word on your resume really counts. So if you're pivoting to tech for the first time, or if you've never worked in tech, how can you tailor your resume to a new field or a new job? The main way to do this is through transferable skills. And transferable skills are generally what we call soft skills. They're not technical necessarily, and they're considered portable from one job to another. So here we have 3 fields on the left and 3 fields on the right. At first glance, these might seem unrelated to one another. But when you think about kind of the core soft skills that are necessary for each, there's actually a lot of overlapping or transferable skills between them that you can highlight in your resume. And again, pulling words out of the job description that you're applying for is going to be a really good way to grab the recruiter or the hiring manager's attention and make them look twice at your experience to think about whether or not your customer service experience could really be relevant to a UX or UI design role. And when you're adding your Udacity experience to your resume, the way that you do this will depend a little bit on your level of experience and where you're currently at in your career, but there are some common threads. So you'll notice for entry-level career changers and prior industry experience, all 3 of those have the education section at the bottom. This is true even if you're a recent graduate or your education is your most recent experience. You can talk about projects that you did in your education at the top of the resume, but your actual education section should always go at the bottom of your resume, and that includes Udacity. At the top of your resume, you want to have projects and the most relevant work experience that you have. So if you are entry level or a career changer and you don't have any relevant work experience, that's okay. Your project section should be the very first thing on your resume at the very top. The only thing that should maybe go above it is your skills section. And that's a way for you to prove that you have the relevant experience, even though your previous jobs might not indicate that. For people who do have prior industry experience, which is considered more than 3 years of experience in the same field, and you're looking to get a promotion or kind of build up to the next level, then depending on your current job and how that relates to the job that you want, you could put your experience section or your project section at the top of your resume. Again, it really depends kind of on how much of a jump you're trying to make. But no matter what, the most relevant experience that you have, whether it be projects whether it be jobs, should always be at the top of your resume. So it's the first thing that people see. And some other ways to stand out, go beyond just having your resume look great and have great content. Have a website or a portfolio and make sure that you link to that at the top of your resume. Make sure that link is on everything that you have. Make sure it's on your LinkedIn. Make sure it's on your blog, on your social media, anywhere where people can see you online. You should be broadcasting your brand to people. And just because you haven't had work experience or you haven't been paid for a job doesn't mean that it's irrelevant. So if you're looking to gain experience, think about if there's any schools or nonprofits or organizations that you're excited about and offer to build up their existing website. And in exchange, you can ask to advertise yourself on their site and use that in your portfolio. Or you can just do a project for fun and that still counts. And it also shows a potential employer that you're really excited about the field to the point where you're willing to go out of your way to just do a project for fun. And finally, be consistent in your brand and network. So we're going to be doing a couple more events coming up on how you can write a stellar cover letter and how to tell your story. So I really recommend these if you're not quite sure about how to advertise your brand or how to create your brand. And don't be shy about getting yourself out there. Like I said, links to your portfolio or to your website should be on every single thing that you have. It should be on your social media. Start with your friends and family. Tell them what you're interested in. They might know somebody. Talk to former coworkers. And don't worry about waiting for everything to be perfect to start broadcasting this. If you tuned in for Mike Salem's webinar yesterday, one of the things he kept saying was that you're going to constantly be iterating on your portfolio, on your resume, and it doesn't have to be perfect or at its final end state because there is no final end state. So just start getting yourself out there and continue to build up your resources and your portfolio as you go. The sooner you do this, the sooner you'll find a job. Some do's and don'ts, which is my quick and dirty list for things that I commonly see people doing or not doing that they should or shouldn't do. So do always include contact information on your resume. Make sure your email is professional. Definitely update your resume every couple of months, even while not job searching. This means that your resume will be ready to go if an opportunity does come up. And it also means that you'll be adding things to your resume when it's fresh in your mind. I always recommend keeping a running master resume with all of your experience on it. I think my master resume is like 6 pages long. And when I'm applying for a new job, I already have my power statements written. I don't have to start from scratch every time. And I can just pull out the things that are most relevant to the job I want to apply for, tailor them. It takes me a lot less time to edit my resume that way than if I was starting from scratch every single time. Do always submit your resume as a PDF. Formatting can get messed up if you are sending in a Word document or even a Google Doc. So PDFs are safe to send out without worrying about your formatting getting messed up. Do include any professional associations, memberships, or volunteer work on your resume. That is great for employers to see. It talks about your character as a person and shows that you are an active, engaged person outside of your work life. Do include your Udacity and other online courses. Just because it's not a formal, accredited higher education platform does not mean that this is not relevant to the skills that you're building. And if anything, it shows an additional commitment to skill building when you do have Udacity or other online courses on your resume. If you have employment gaps on your resume, try a skills-based resume because this focuses more on your skills and less on the dates of your employment. And there's a link there if you aren't familiar with what a skills-based resume looks like. And do always proofread your resume 1,000,000 times. Get other people to proofread it. Read it backwards so you don't miss things that you might not see the first time around. And just go through it with a fine-tooth comb every single time. Some don'ts are don't include your photo, mailing address, your social media, unless they're professional accounts or any other information that discloses kind of more personal aspects of your identity. Social media, if you're only using it for tech purposes or for things that are relevant to kind of your professional brand or your business or the work that you're doing, you just want to stay away from that. If you have anything political on there or photos of you, drinking beers on the beach with your friend, that's great, but not the best thing to put on your resume. Don't send in the same resume for every job, should always be tailored and unique. Don't include irrelevant interests or hobbies. Some people really like putting interests on their resumes. I always say that if you really want to, you can. It should be a small section at the bottom. And if you have really cool or unique interests or hobbies that not a lot of other people have, then it's great to put that on your resume because it kind of shows a little bit more about you. Me, I don't have interests on my resume because the things that I like to do are things that a lot of people like to do. So I'm not going to say that I like traveling and reading and running because tons of other people like that. It doesn't really say anything interesting or important about me. So even if those things are important to you, maybe don't really matter as much to another person. Don't include a vague or generic summary. If you have a summary, great, but make sure that it's really specific to the job that you're applying for and is brief and impactful. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that when I'm editing some of the resumes in a few minutes. Don't use personal pronouns or periods. These are just resume no-nos. They're not necessary. Never lie about previous experience or education. This almost always comes out. And if you get offered a job and you said that you know how to do something and then they ask you to do it on the job once you actually start and you don't actually know how, that is a really bad situation to be in. I've seen people in that situation before. It's not great. Don't do it. Don't include any references or salary expectations on your resume. You might be asked to do that in the job application. That's okay, but they shouldn't go on your resume specifically. And finally, don't rely solely on your resume to get you a job. Your resume is one piece in your portfolio, and there are a lot of other aspects to your portfolio that you should be focusing on. So don't just think that one resume is going to get you a job. It is just one pretty small piece of the whole job application puzzle that you need to put together in order to present yourself as a strong candidate. So I went over that pretty quickly, and I want to share some additional resources to help you get started. There are free career lessons on the Udacity website. Definitely encourage you to check those out if you haven't already. Similarly, there's a career resource center where you can find tips on how to start your job search and plan out your career. And there's also a list of job openings. This is available to everybody. There's a great article that Laszlo Bock, who is the former SVP of People Operations at Google, wrote about how to write a winning resume. He talks more about power statements, and I think he does a great job of just kind of highlighting how you can really make your power statements stand out. We have a list of action verbs if you just need help brainstorming different verbs to start your power statements with. Jason Wong, who is Udacity's former head of recruiting. He's since moved on to his next career step, but he wrote a great article talking about what he looks for when reviewing candidates. We have a resume checklist that you can kind of compare your resume against to see if it is hitting the mark. And then crafting a killer resume, this is a link to the webinar I did a couple months ago where I go into a little bit more detail on power statements and some of the things that I just went over pretty quickly. And we have other Career Month events coming up that I highly encourage everybody to check out. So tomorrow at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific time, Matthew Perkins, who works on Udacity's career team, is going to be leading a 90-minute workshop where he'll actually walk through step-by-step building your resume. So starting with your name and contact information at the top, then your skills, then your experience, then your projects, and just kind of go through all of that every step of the way. And you'll have the chance to ask questions, and he'll be there live answering questions also. So if you're the type of person who's been procrastinating your resume for months and you know you need to do it, but you just can't bring yourself to start, go to this working session. It's a great way to hold yourself accountable and connect with other peers who are building their resumes also. On Friday, Annie Wong will be talking, also from Udacity's career team, will be talking about how to write a stellar cover letter. And on Friday, September 21st, we're going to be rebroadcasting a recording that Christopher Watkins, who's a senior writer at Udacity, did a couple months ago about how to write about your interests, accomplishments, and activities, and how doing that can actually be one of the most important things that you do for your career. So we are going to jump now into the live resume review and Q&A. I'm going to ask everyone to bear with me while I switch screens. I have a couple resumes pulled up in Microsoft Word. Great. So these are I have 3 resumes that I'm going to go through. These are all real resumes that you all shared ahead of time. So thank you to everyone who submitted a resume. And I took out personal identifying information, so you don't know who they are. But if you submitted one of these, hopefully you recommend your own resume. So this is the first resume that was submitted. And I'm just going to scroll through it slowly so you can get a look at it. And I think when looking through this resume, some of the things that stood out to me that this person did really well is they highlighted a lot of skills. It's really clear that they have a pretty broad technical skill set, as evidenced in their skills section here. So that's wonderful to see. When I'm a recruiter, I want to know that I'm hiring someone for a technical role who can do the technical job. It also seems like they have a good amount of work experience. There's several different things on here, all within the tech field. So it's pretty clear that this person is committed to tech, and they have a good amount of experience dating back to 2006, which is great. And it looks like they've also pursued some additional learning outside of work, which is really great to see. It shows that they're committed to their professional development and their technical skills development. All of that is great. I think some of the things that I would recommend this person improve to make their resume even stronger is clean up some of the formatting. And it looks like they kind of try to do like an HTML format for their resume. So I think they get an A for effort with creativity. But when recruiters are only spending a few seconds looking at a resume, it might distract them from the actual content because it's not super clear at first glance what's happening here. And so there's things like there's bold in the middle, there's bold at the beginning and bold at the end, and it draws your eyes to things. Bold font draws your eyes to things. So you want to make sure that if it's bold, it's really important to see. And the things that are bold right now, like this doesn't need to be bold. It's drawing my eye to something irrelevant. It's just a formatting detail. And for their experience, they don't have power statements. So they have some of their experience is really short, other experience is longer. But I would recommend breaking this up into bullets and breaking it up into individual power statements. So it's really clear for me to look through and kind of understand what it is that they're trying to communicate. So when I was editing this, you can see that this is how I edited it. This is how I cleaned it up a little bit more. To make sure that you all can see my screen. Great. So here are my revisions to this resume. So I put their website at the top before their GitHub was at the bottom of their resume. And I moved it to the top along with their LinkedIn. I cleaned up the header a little bit. I also took out the personal identifying information like their date of birth, their social media handle, which they could maybe keep on here if their social media profile is completely professional and there's nothing personal on it. So maybe they could leave that in. It would be kind of up to their judgment. I took out their nationality and their marital status. I think these are norms in some countries. They're not a norm in the US. And actually in the US, it's illegal to ask people those types of questions in an interview. So you definitely shouldn't put them on your resume. Depending on the norms in your local job market, this might vary a little bit. But I would say on the whole, in the tech industry, it is not a norm and it is not necessary to put things like your marital status, your date of birth, and your nationality on your resume. I recommend leaving them out. And then what I did is the key skills section and the summary section. The summary wasn't super specific. And so what I did was I actually pulled in this key skills to make it a little bit more specific so it's clear about what the value add that this person offers is. And then I changed the key skills section to include all of the technology skills that they had listed under technologies on their resume. So it just combined two sections and then simplified another section. And then for their power statements, I have some questions here that I would ask them when editing. their resume. So their first power statement says, work with developers from around the world under an agile methodology. So what I would want to know is, how do you work with them? How many developers are you working with? And what have you accomplished while working with them? For the second bullet, it starts with the word support. And that was one of the verbs that I think you can usually find a better example to use that just sounds a little bit stronger. So what's another action verb that this person could use to make this power statement stand out more? They talk about fixing bugs. How do they do it? How many bugs? What is the result of doing that? The third power statement, what's the result of integrating web analytics into the main site? Why is this important? Why did that matter to the company? Because if I'm a company looking to hire somebody, I want to know how they were able to benefit another company previously. Similarly, support front-end development tasks. What type of tasks? What's the result? Next bullet is the same thing. How often? Put some quantifiers in there. What is the result? And then it looks like Gmail API testing. Maybe this could also be combined with the above power statement. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell because there isn't enough detail for me to understand really what the difference is between these, except that one is in Gmail and one is in Salesforce, but the process could be similar. So maybe this could be combined into one power statement just to save space and make things more concise. Either way, I want to know how often they're doing these two things and what the result of these two things are. So those are the questions that I ask when I'm looking at a resume, and I would take the same process through the rest of their resume and for the rest of their power statements. I didn't do this for every single one, but you get the idea of the types of things that you want to be thinking about when editing your resume. And then what I did is I simplified their education section a little bit, because before they had Java courses and Android programming courses, but it wasn't clear what platform they were taking those courses on. And this person listed out a bunch of different learning platforms, which is great, but I don't know what courses they took through each of those. So I don't have a clear way of understanding, what skills they were learning through what platform, or if one of these platforms is particularly reputable, I want to know what courses they took through that one. That means a lot to me as an employer. So I neatened up this section a little bit and put the dates on the right side. So now you can see that dates are all aligned along the right margin. It's really clear to see when they were doing different things, when they were working at different places. And when you're looking at it, it just has an easier flow to it. It's easier to see what each section is about, where my eyes should go, and it's a little bit more predictable. And then I kept their volunteer experience on here, and I just put it in its own section. Again, I think it's great to show volunteer experience on your resume. It just shares a little bit more about your integrity as a person, your passions, your interests, things like that. So moving on to resume number 2. Sorry for the messy screen shares in between. So this is the second resume that I'm going to go over. And this was the person's photo, but I blued it out so you don't see what they look like. And so you can see that they have name, contact information at the top, which is great. I would not put photos on resumes. This is not a norm in the tech field as a whole. It might be a norm in some local economies, but like I said before, if you're applying to tech jobs, you generally want to be mirroring the expectations. And because the tech market is a global one, there are some standard practices between countries. So even if the local job market might have different norms and practices, I say always stick to the tech norm, which there are some global norms around. So I think at a high level, what this person does really well is they have a strong summary. It's concise, it's straightforward, it shows their value as an Android developer and their passion about that. It's clear what they're looking for. They're looking for a position as an Android developer. So I think this person uses the summary really well. And when looking through their resume, another thing that they did well is it seems like they have not a ton of experience, maybe only a couple years of experience, 1 to 2 years of experience, but they have 2 different job work experiences on here. They have a project section, which is great. And then if you keep scrolling down, they have this really awesome skills section where it shows all of the ways that they have applied their Android development skills, the things that they've used their Android development skills for. And then it also talks about their deep learning skills. So they have two different sections for kind of those two passion areas for them. So despite having minimal work experience, this person has a pretty robust resume. And I think this is a great example of how you can take minimal work experience, but a lot of passion and kind of additional education, maybe traditional, maybe non-traditional, through Udacity or other online platforms, and communicate your value add. I think some things that this person could do better is the resume is long. It's 3 pages. And there's a lot on here that could be condensed, but there's also just a lot of white space. So you don't want to have wasted space on your resume. This whole area next to their project, that could be used for something more important. So it's about finding ways to keep your resume as condensed and concise as possible while still being detailed and easy to read. And I would also recommend structuring their power statements a little bit more, because it seems like they have some pretty good experience in their current role and in their previous internship. And I think these power statements could really be built out more to highlight their value add. So some of the ways that I edited this, pulling up my edited version, is I took out all that white space. I took out the images. I'll zoom in a little bit so folks can see. And I moved their portfolio URL to the top along with their contact information, where they live. And so I tried to keep kind of a similar format with the clear sections with the lines underneath each of the headers, but just made it a little bit closer together so it's easy to read. So I kept this person's objective. I think it's a great objective. It's a great length. And then I moved their project portion right below that because this person doesn't have a ton of work experience, but they do have a lot of project experience. This should be kind of the main thing that their resume focuses on. And then I noticed that they had a baby monitor project under their machine learning experience. This was really cool and sounded like a really cool project. So I just created its own section up here under projects. And then I created kind of placeholders for project 3 and project 4, et cetera. They might have more projects or fewer, where they can kind of just plug in this information. And then I think it's also important to have links to those projects. So you want to have a link to your GitHub or a link to your website or portfolio where someone can get more information on, your process for building this, what tools you've used, what processes. You should never just have your project summaries on your resume without a link to where they're stored on the web. And then beneath that, I created a skills section, and I took their longer skills breakdown from their Android and machine learning sections, and I just pulled all of the skills, all of the hard skills that I saw in those sections, and put them in here in a summary. And what this does is it makes it really easy if I'm a recruiter to quickly skim through. And if I know that I am looking for an Android developer who has UI experience, I can skim through this and quickly see, yes, this person has UI experience. Whereas if that was buried only in a longer sentence at the bottom of the resume, that might not stand out to me right away. And then in an ideal world, they would talk more about how they applied each of these skills to different projects up here in this section in their different projects. So you see here, they talk about using Arduino, and then Arduino is also in their machine learning skills section. So it's duplicated, but here it talks more about how they actually use that skill and not just that they have that skill. And then their work experience is at the bottom of the resume, not because it's the least important, but because I think the projects that they've done expand on some of the things that they've probably done in their jobs, and their projects highlight the breadth of their experience a little bit more than their work experience, since projects are probably from work and school, whereas work experience is just about 1.5 years of their overall tech experience. And so some questions that I would have when editing these power statements, this first power statement is pretty loaded for such a short sentence, but they talk about being the system architect, a programmer, and a software management engineer. I think each of those responsibility buckets could probably have 1 to 2 of their own power statements. So I would break this down into individual accomplishments and have 1 to 2 bullets for what their accomplishments are as a system architect, what their accomplishments are as a programmer, etc. And then they mentioned collaborating with a team. What was their role on the team? How did they collaborate? Was there something that they led? And could they say, instead of collaborated with a team, could they say, led X portion of this project on a team of 5 to help build the first Aviva Android app? Something like that, just to make it stand out a little bit more. And when you have something like this, the Aviva Android app, so up here, they talk more about that app. So you don't have to go into a ton of detail in your power statements about something that's also in your project section. It just mentions it up there. And then if somebody wants to get more information, they say, oh yeah, I saw this under their projects. I can go to their GitHub and get more information on this if I want to learn more. And then their education is at the bottom of their resume, right here. So pretty small section. All right, so that is resume number 2. And finally, we're going to move on to resume number 3. So this is resume number 3 that was submitted. And I think that this person overall has a really strong resume. It's clear that they spent a lot of time editing the formatting. The structure is great. It's concise. It's only 1 page. It's the formatting is consistent. Same things are bold in every line. The spacing is even. They have clear links to their portfolio. They focus on their skills and then their projects and then their education. So the layout makes sense. So I think overall, looking at this resume, it's really clear to me what this person has done, what skills they have. I know how to get in touch with them because it's right at the top of their resume. I know where their GitHub is. And overall, I think this is just a really strong resume presentation, super clear and concise. I think the growth areas here are a little more nuanced. I think that there are a few, and this might seem super nitpicky, but there's a few, like the font sizes change. So like this right here is 11-point font, whereas this over here is 12-point font, which again might seem super nitpicky, but things like that do make a difference and can kind of distract people a little bit. Similarly, the font up here is smaller than the, or just like a smaller typeface than this font. And I think it would help actually for this person to have an objective, because when I was looking through this, I see that they have a lot of coding projects, but then they're in a data science scholarship, which is great. But what I'm wondering when I'm looking at this is, are they interested in data science? Are they interested in development? When I'm looking through this, I'm assuming they're interested in development because that's where their interests are. But there's kind of just a question around how this educational experience ties into their other work. So I didn't make a ton of changes to this one because, like I said, I think it's came in as a really strong resume. But some of the things that I did just slightly tweak are I aligned the margins here, so everything is on the same margin, whereas before this was tucked in a little bit indented. And I made the font size more consistent throughout the resume. And I moved their external experience first. So their technical portfolio website was second before, and I moved it to last because the first 2 projects show more about the work they've done for other people. Not saying that your own portfolio is not important, but I think when you can show that you have examples of work that support other people and other businesses or other users besides yourself, that shows your ability to kind of translate your work to a more external customer-facing or customer service-facing platform. And similarly, I moved their Udacity experience a little bit lower below Coding Dojo because it seems like their projects align more with the full stack track than the data science track. If this person is really interested in data science and they want to take their career in that direction, I would say to keep this experience first, But again, they would just want to include an objective to kind of explain how their data science goals tie into their previous web development goals, because just from their resume, it's not super obvious on the front end. And then I also included date sections for their education experiences, just so people know, when they did these things. Did they do it last year? Did they do it 5 years ago, 10 years ago? It just helps kind of give the reader some context around, where the person's at in their experience in their career. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I would love now to take to answer some of your prepared questions and also answer any live questions.
Yeah, we have a couple pre-submitted questions,
Great.
And then we have a lot of live questions.
Wonderful.
So we'll try and get through as many as we
Okay.
can. How would you recommend updating your resume to reflect new skills learned if you are not actively applying them in your current job?
I would say, and I think this goes about keeping your most relevant experience at the top of your resume. So I would say look for projects and things that you can do that are applying those skills and put that at the top of your resume. You still want to have your current job on there because you're working and that's relevant. Even if you're only gaining transferable skills and no directly relevant skills, you still want to have that on there. But your project should go at the top. So I think having a project section on your resume and having your skills and your projects at the top and then your work experience below is a good way to draw the reader's attention to the field that you want to go into and the skills that you have that are preparing you to go into that field versus the skills that you currently have.
That makes a lot of sense. And is it recommended to include a position that just lasted 2 months? So I think in this student situation, it wasn't a good fit and they left. Should you still put that on your resume?
I think that really depends on the role. If the role on paper and if the things that you were doing in those 2 months, even though that's not a ton of time, if that's really relevant to the next career step you want to take and you don't have very much other relevant experience to back that up, you maybe want to put it on your resume. Be prepared to get questions about it though, and you just want to be ready to answer maybe some challenging questions around why you left. And there's ways to do that in a really professional way that doesn't make you sound like a flighty person who's just going to jump ship at the first time something gets hard in your job, and also doesn't speak ill of your previous employer. So even if the reasons you left were because your manager was a nightmare and your coworkers were terrible and everything was miserable, never say that in an interview. You want to be really tactful and careful about how you approach that in a professional way, and just kind of highlight that it wasn't a good fit, and this is what you were expecting from the job, and this is how it actually ended up being, and that you made the decision that it was in your best interest and in the company's best interest to look for another position elsewhere because it just wasn't the right match.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of other relevant experience, though, that you can fall back on, I would say you can just leave that off your resume entirely. It doesn't have to go on there. So if you can talk about previous experience before that is also relevant to the jobs you want to go for, I would just do that and not mention it. If they ask directly, certainly you have to say something about it, but you don't have to put it on your resume.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch over to live questions since we only have about 10 minutes left.
Yes.
Let me pull those up. How should I address year gaps between jobs on my resume?
So I think the good thing about tech is that gaps on resumes aren't as much of a red flag as they have been in the past or as they still are in other fields. So I think it depends on why you have that gap. On your resume, you don't have to do anything. I would just format your resume as you would. Be honest about the dates. It could come up in the interview process. And I would think of a truthful way to describe why you were taking that year off. Maybe it was by choice, and maybe you were doing some self-discovery, or you took a year off to travel, or spend time with your family, or figure out what you wanted to do for your career. That's great. You can say that. If you spent that year building your skills, even better. If that was not a willing year and maybe you were laid off from a job and it just took you a really long time to find another position, I think there's a way that you can talk about that in a a way that doesn't make you seem like an undesirable candidate. It's really normal for the job search to take a long time, so I wouldn't worry about that. But I would just say, you were looking for the right fit, and you wanted to make sure that the next step that you took was a good next step for you and aligned with your career goals. And so you took your time and you were really deliberate in applying for jobs and in talking to people and figuring out what would make the most sense for you to do next. And I think that's a way to kind of gloss over some of the insecurity and the challenges of being unemployed for a year, and without raising any issues for potential issues or concerns for an employer. But it's really common in tech right now to take time off and to take a break.
That's true.
Kelsey did that herself between her last job and this one. So I don't think it's as much of a concern as it used to be.
Yeah, and I think that there's a way, just to add on to, again, show your relevant experience, and then you'll have an opportunity when you get to that interview to explain what that gap is and do it in a way that shows that you are desirable. You were growing, you were taking a Udacity course. I think you'll have an opportunity to explain, and it's not something to be self-conscious of on your actual resume.
Yeah.
Can I add an internship as work experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Experience is experience. You could go out and do your own project for fun, totally randomly, and just come up with your own thing and put it on your resume. If you're applying relevant skills to a situation, it doesn't even have to be, a super viable project. If you're building your skills and learning and you're developing things that other companies want to see, put it on your resume. Internships, jobs, volunteer work, fun projects, all of it.
Perfect. That answers a few other questions, I think. Someone asked, could LinkedIn be the master resume that you were talking about, where you just put everything, and then you can tailor from there when you're applying for a specific role? And is that okay to just have everything living on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I would say so. You're going to come to the point where you're probably going to want to start taking things off of your LinkedIn. So a year or two ago, I went through my LinkedIn and I was looking at previous job experience, and I said, I am never going to want to do anything that is even relevant to this. If I do, I'll add it back onto my LinkedIn, but I just didn't feel like it was worth space. So a LinkedIn can definitely be longer than your resume, and can definitely kind of serve as your master experience and can go into more detail than your resume can. You still want to keep it a little bit tailored though. So if you're looking for jobs in tech, you don't need to have your waitressing job on your resume. Not to say that experience didn't teach you important skills and values, but it's not going to be the thing that is going to really help, move the needle for you, most likely. So I think you should still be tailored with your LinkedIn, but you definitely have more wiggle room and certainly more space to put things on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just reading through these.
Yeah.
This is a good question. So what advice do you have for someone younger? So someone who is just coming out of school, let's say graduate school, and they really don't have any professional experience. How do you craft a resume that shows you still have the skills for the job?
Absolutely. So I think that professional experience is great. You can really highlight a lot of transferable skills with what we would call, like unprofessional experience. So when I was first applying to jobs, I had a waitressing job on my resume. I had a retail job on my resume. And I was just really deliberate about talking about the skills that I gained from those experiences, customer service, communicating, attention to detail. In my retail job, I got to do kind of like some more like design things, like figuring out store layouts. So that brought in some like marketing and design relating to UX, UI, back to that transferable skills slide. So I think that there's ways that you can highlight what we would call like non-professional experience in a way that highlights your professional skills. But I think, again, finding opportunities to do projects, even if they're just passion projects, things you do on the side, things you volunteer to do. Maybe you build your friend's website, they're starting their own business, build their website for them, and advertise on their website for free. put your brand on there, and just finding opportunities to kind of build up your portfolio and your skills that take you in the direction that you want to go, can be a great way to make up for a lack of relevant work experience in the field that you want to work in.
Yeah. It sounds like it's really important to make sure you're unique and stand out. So regardless of if you're a waitress or you work at Starbucks, or you can show that I know what is valuable about me and what my skill set is and what I was able to take away.
Yeah.
Even if someone just might see a waitress and not.
Yeah. And I would put in a plug for the Christopher Watkins webinar later on in September, when he talks more about how to tell your story, because I think you get to decide how you curate your experience, and you get to decide what story you tell about yourself. So even if your experience isn't what you want it to have been, you get to decide how you present that and what details you pull out of that. And really, you can kind of tell people what to think about you.
Absolutely.
And decide how they view you. So if you're feeling like a little insecure about that, definitely check out the Christopher Watkins webinar. I think it'll be really helpful. And I think Annie's will be really good too, because she is really good at, kind of telling stories and narrating things. So I think both of those would be really helpful to check out.
That was a good plug.
Yeah.
All right, we've got 4 minutes. Let's see if we can squeeze one more in. Even though it was, this is a good question. Even though it was just for learning or for the classroom, what do you think about listing Udacity Nanodegree projects that other students might also have on their resumes under your own personal projects on your resume?
Great question. I'm actually going to quote what Mike said in yesterday's webinar, because I think he had a great answer. So yes, put them on your resume for sure. And if you want to stand out more, take that project to the next level. How can you expand on that project? How can you make it your own? Add your own creativity, and take it to the next level. And so if you're worried about putting a project on your resume that maybe thousands of other people have also done, making it your own by figuring out what can be improved or what can be enhanced is a really cool way to kind of elevate it and bring it to the next level. But even if you don't have time to do that, and let's say you need to apply to a job right now, it can totally go on your resume, but I do recommend finding a way to kind of make it a little bit more of your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. This was really great. I mean, the live editing was super cool. I think a lot of students, from the chat, really loved it. And I think that's really helpful to see exactly what a nice formatted resume looks like, especially when you compare the two next to each other. So thank you for joining us. Again, this is our second week in Career Month. So we have not only the rest of this week, but 2 more weeks left. And you saw some of the upcoming events on Kathleen's slide. This week we have a cover letter webinar on Friday at 11 a.m. And the link is not only in these slides, but we'll share it as well in the chat. So you should definitely join us for that. Again, it's all about how to craft your narrative and how to tell your story in a short, in just one page when you're submitting that cover letter to an employer. You should also check out the free courses again, these are resources listed in the slides, but on the resume and in the career portal. I think there's a lot of great tools there as you're now going to go and work through your own resume. That's a great place to start. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me or Kathleen. I think a lot of scholarship students know us in the Slack channels. And again, we're community managers here. So we'll see you on Friday for the cover letter webinar, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks for joining, everyone.